Hi, this is Chris Charla. Welcome to the Game Maker's Notebook, being recorded here at Lake Como, Italy. We're talking today to Jen MacLean, formerly of Microsoft, who's going to talk to us about things that are happening in the market that developers need to understand, her biggest pet peeve in gaming, and what she's not working on next. Oh, this is going to be a disaster. Welcome, Jen, to DICE. How do you pronounce your last name?
It's MacLean, the same way it's been for the last 15 years you've known me.
Enough. Yeah. Okay. All right. All right, Jen, welcome to DICE. Thanks for participating in this awesome podcast. I want to talk about or hear you talk about just some interesting things that are happening in games and changes we're seeing in the market that game makers should be aware of. But before we do that, let's let the listening audience get to know you a little bit better. Do you want to give me the sort of like 5-second 5-second story of your life up until you discovered games?
Oh, well, it was terribly boring up until I discovered games. And I discovered games when I was 7 and I got an Atari 2600. And my proudest accomplishment growing up was getting to the score threshold in Pitfall, where you take a picture of the screen and you mail it away, and Activision mailed me back a certificate and a patch. And I was so proud. That was by far my most impressive and most important accomplishment growing up.
I think that is getting an Activision patch is something that you deserve to be proud of.
I mean, these days you've got to buy them for $70 billion to get an Activision patch. Yeah. So,
yeah, Activision patch as a kid is a hardcore thing. So, you were a 2600 gamer. You went to college. I skipped a couple years.
And a Commodore 64.
Okay. Tell us about the Commodore 64.
I loved my C64, and it really got me started playing Infocom games. And I just lost myself in these text adventures. And I remember you got these great packages with Infocom games, and they came with feelies, but they also did little tiny bios of developers in the back of the package. And I remember reading those bios and thinking, wow, I can't imagine how cool these people must be to make video games. It wasn't like Rockstar out of reach. It was Rockstar plus astronaut out of reach. And the first time I met Steve Moretsky, it just brought back this flood of childhood joy where I spent so many hours engaging in these worlds that he created. I have never fangirled so hard in my life.
He is the only person in the game industry I can't have a conversation with. Like anybody else, any famous did this, did that, I can just talk to like they're a regular person. With Steve Moretsky, I'm restricted only to saying, "You're Steve Moretsky."
That was my reaction pretty much.
Yeah, he's amazing. So how did you first go from playing games to starting to make games?
I was captain of the fencing team in college. I know those dots don't necessarily connect automatically, but my coach was a game designer at a company called Microprose. And Microprose was hiring part-time playtesters. And my coach knew that I loved video games. And so he recommended me for a job. As it turns out, there are 4 of us who fenced together at Hopkins who are still in the games industry. Hamilton Chu, who's the CEO at Second Dinner, Tim Train, who's the GM at Second Dinner, Jason Coleman, who's the CEO at Sparky Pants, and now me. And so we all ended up going from fencing to playtesting and then staying in game development.
And was games your first job out of school?
It was. I actually started working part-time while I was still in school. So I somehow managed to take a full course load, work part-time 20 to 30 hours a week, and also be captain of a varsity sport. I clearly did not need to sleep very much back then.
Yeah. And so have you ever worked outside of games?
I have, and it's terrible. I don't recommend it. I worked for a digital health startup and also worked for a client group, essentially for a company called Bright Horizons, a division of Bright Horizons. And I remember going back into games after those detours and thinking, I am back amongst my people again. There's just nothing like game developers and how amazingly supportive they can be, and how, at the end of the day, our job is to make fun, and our job is to create these strong emotions in other people and to really make their lives richer and more rewarding. And I don't think there's anything more fulfilling than that or more enjoyable than that.
Yeah, totally. So walk us through how you went from, like, I feel like we're skipping around your career a little bit. So from like QA at Microprose to the first time you left the game industry, let's just say.
Oh, wow. Okay. So QA at Microprose. Then I got a call from a small company called America Online that wanted to know if I was interested in working in online games. So I ended up leaving QA to go be a product manager at AOL. And really, that was what they called people who were responsible for acting as external producers. So I got to work with companies like Engage Games Online and Mythic Entertainment. We brought World of Warcraft to AOL. We did Gemstone 3, which was an incredibly popular text adventure. And that's where I also got to work in the AOL EA.com joint venture. Had a great time at AOL. It was very much the internet roller coaster. For a while, Games was the second most popular service on AOL, second only to chat. And then AOL went unlimited pricing. And we went from being incredibly valuable to incredibly expensive, literally overnight. We had a lot of interesting twists and turns as we looked at how to monetize that engagement. And how you take these players who are absolutely fanatic about their experiences and move them from a flat rate subscription to a way to engage in a more meaningful, more valuable way that created value not only for the player, but also for the service provider and for the developer. And that was a really consistent theme throughout my career. I left AOL. I went to Comcast, where I was hired to be director of subscriber applications. So Comcast had recently acquired AT&T Broadband. They suddenly found themselves running the largest broadband service in the world, did not really understand how to do it. And so I came in looking at essentially different things that would help people use their broadband service and really maximize the enjoyment they got out of it. I said, really from day one, okay, this is games, sports, entertainment, and games. And so I eventually narrowed my remit to focus on those three things. Did a deal with a very early music streaming service called Rhapsody that predated Spotify. Did a number of video content deals with companies like MLB and Fox Sports, but my passion was always in games. And I remember this was actually where I first did a deal with the Xbox team. It was around the launch of Halo 3, and we loved using games to highlight the value of broadband. We ended up talking to Xbox, and we wanted content for Comcast Video on Demand service. Xbox wanted to promote Halo 3. So we did this amazing swap where I took unsold channel inventory, which tended to be on channels like Spike at 11 o'clock at night. So exactly the audience Xbox wanted to talk to for Halo 3. And swapped that for exclusive content for VOD, plus free games, plus free consoles. Everyone in the field loved me because I was there giving them a ton of free games and free consoles that they could use for subscriber acquisition. Xbox loved me because they got millions of dollars of essentially free TV advertising. And it was such a great example of a win-win deal. Players were happy because they saw really cool behind-the-scenes content. Xbox was happy because they were able to reach a lot more players. Comcast was happy because they were able to partner with one of the best brands in games to really highlight the value of a great internet connection. I ended up continuing on with Comcast, became the VP of games there, worked on a number of joint ventures, worked again with friends at EA to launch a fantasy sports service, worked with friends at Disney, and then left to go join a studio called 38 Studios that was run by Kurt Schilling.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And along the way, while that was happening, I want to get back to 38 Studios in a second, but we'll just pause briefly to talk about the IGDA and your work at the IGDA. So you eventually went on to become the boss, right?
Well, sort of. At that time, I joined the board of directors of the IGDA. Yeah. So the IGDA is the International Game Developers Association. It's the largest professional association for game developers in the world. It advocates for game developers and for the profession of game development to make it more sustainable and to help promote games as a great form of media and entertainment and really as a potential force for good. So at that time, I was a member of the board. I became chair of the board of directors, worked with the executive director at the time, Jason De La Roca, who's still very active in the games industry. And that's where we first met.
Yeah. And then you fired me.
I don't know that I fired you as much as I asked you to either participate more or vacate your role.
This is called being managed out. No, but it was the first time we ever got to meet and hang out, so that was cool. But so talk about, and I do want to talk more about the IGDA, but talk about your 38 Studios experience. People may not know it as much now, but there was a time when it was really, really, I don't know what the word is. Notorious, touch point, infamous. I don't know. It was really like a moment in the game industry. So yes. Can you just kind of walk us through the whole 38 Studios?
That would be a podcast in itself, but I will give you sort of the shortened version, which is 38 Studios was founded by a professional athlete named Curt Schilling, best known for the Bloody Sock and bringing a World Series championship to Boston, with great accomplishments. And, I participated in a Harvard Business School case study about 38 Studios, which really looked at whether or not a professional athlete could make the transition to a successful founder. And I think in many ways, really, the answer there is no. Because for all of the great intentions that Curt had, and he really did genuinely love video games, when you are a professional athlete of that caliber, you are surrounded by people whose job it is to fulfill your wish, to make any problems or distractions go away, and to make sure that you are in the best possible position to deliver in a very short, intense time frame, and to focus your entire being on that. That does not work well when you are starting a brand new company. And so what Curt would do with 38 is if you told him something that he didn't want to hear, he'd keep asking people till he found the person who told him what he did want to hear. And that ended up really leading to a series of very, very bad decisions and a lot of arguments, frankly. Curt and I had a really memorable argument once where we were moving the studio down to Rhode Island. We got funding from the state of Rhode Island to essentially relocate our studio headquarters there. And we had a budget of $5 million for the office build out. And the GM came back with a budget of $10 million. And I was furious, absolutely furious. And I, said point blank, look, what is going to help you make a better game? An extra month of development or bamboo floors? And Curt consistently in that meeting said, don't worry about it. I'll write a check. Don't worry about it. I'll write a check. Don't worry about it. I'll write a check. So finally I asked the GM to leave. It was so awkward, Chris. It was like all of the executives in that meeting are watching mom and dad fight. It was terrible. So I asked the GM and a few of our VPs to leave, and I'm there with Curt and our lead director and our CFO. And I said, you just told the entire company that budgets are irrelevant, that schedules are irrelevant. You have made it impossible for me to do my job and for our CFO to do his job. You've made this game unshippable because every time you say, don't worry about it, I'll write a check, you create the perception that no matter what happens, you're going to fund it. And you can't do that. Like literally, you can't do that. Everybody knows how much money you made. You cannot keep doing that. Shortly thereafter, I ended up taking a leave of absence from the company. The company ran out of money. It went out of business. And really, it left hundreds of people in the lurch. And it's a tragedy. And I often, even now, even 12 years later, will go back and say, what else could I have done to prevent that? What could I have done to give people more warning, to make sure people were more aware of the situation we were in, or to stop the situation or do something differently? It is something that I think still keeps me up at night. And while I learned a lot, my hope is that nobody ever has to learn those painful lessons again.
Yeah, I don't think there's much you could have done given the situation you were in.
I think it's really important to keep asking the question.
Yeah, that's fair. So after 38 Studios, what was next?
After 38 Studios, I made a detour to a digital health startup, and then to Bright Horizons, where I ran client relations for one of their divisions, and then could not stay away from games. So got back into the games industry, ended up running the IGDA Foundation, which is a 501c3 that's focused on promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion in the games industry, as well as the IGDA, this time as the executive director.
Nice. Were you part of the IGDA when it got health insurance going?
Yeah, I was not. I inherited that. I think it's Kate Edwards that gets the credit for that. Okay. Yeah.
That's still cool.
Yeah.
And then after IGDA, you went to Amazon.
I went to AWS, where I ran worldwide business development for small and mid-sized game studios.
Cool. How was that?
It was... Amazon has a culture that I think you either love or hate. And I have to tell you, I learned so much at Amazon. And a lot of my role in this really, it was so meaningful to me personally, because I would look for studios that had the potential to drive significant cloud usage and figure out what AWS could do to help them. Looking at how we found, out of the 100,000 people around the world making games, how could we find the people who would benefit most from working with AWS and support them, particularly before they got big? And so we would do things that would make really meaningful differences in the lives of these studios. And it was incredibly rewarding. And I got to work with amazing people. And some of the leadership principles that I've taken with me after AWS include customer obsession, player obsession when you think about making games, but you've got to keep your customer, your player top of mind, and bias for action. And as you know, I may be over-index on bias for action, but it is something that I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have had that time at Amazon and to learn so much from so many people there.
That's cool. And then I want to talk a lot about maybe some of the things that you have come out of what you learned at Microsoft. But first, let's just talk about what your time at Microsoft was like.
Yeah, I spent 3 years at Microsoft, where I was the GM of Creator Partnerships, and my team led partner management for our largest third-party partners, so companies like EA, Epic, Ubisoft, Embracer, Riot, Take-Two, Roblox, and then also my team led global release management as well. So I got a chance to work with many of the largest developers really on the planet. And I got to see them in a lot of really great times and a lot of really not so great times. So I was there from 2021 to 2024, and wow, that was a roller coaster.
Yeah. There's so much we could talk about the Xbox days. We probably can't, because I'm still there. So we can talk about them later after a beer. But I think it's a good summary of. And it's a good summary of a tiny little fraction of what you did at Xbox. But when I look at your, when we look at your, and I don't know how much you want to talk about what you're doing next. So I don't know if we'll.
I'm not quite ready to talk about that yet.
That's fair. Under wraps. But when I look at your career, from starting in QA, through, Comcast and 38 and Amazon and Xbox, you moved from a purely product role, like a literal game development role, to a product management role, and gradually became more and more on the business side. And, like finishing, to date at Microsoft as, like a pure business person, obviously working with partners and working with games. How much of that was intentional? How much of that was just sort of contingency, like, hey, that's just the next job? And how do you, when you take a moment and just look back at your career to date, like, how do you feel about, how does a 7-year-old holding the Activision patch feel about how the career's looked in terms of just how it's grown?
Wow, that 7-year-old's mind is totally blown. I don't think she could have ever expected half of what I've been really lucky to experience. It's true that I've moved into a more business role, but I love games. I love them. People will talk about TV shows, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really watch TV. I play games. I wish I had as many hours as some people did, but when I have a free hour, the first thing I do is think about what game I want to play. So it's funny, when I was leaving Xbox and I told some partners goodbye, unanimously, their reaction was, this doesn't surprise me at all. It is so obvious that you love games and you love the people that make them and you love the process of making them, that this makes total sense for you. We're going to miss you, but it makes total sense. And so when I think about that career journey, it's true that I've gone more and more into business, but I see business as a means to an end. Fundamentally, we as game developers want to make amazing experiences that reach the right player at the right time on the right platform. It's not even always about reaching the most players possible. It's about reaching the right player and really creating that experience that's going to resonate with them. So from my perspective as a business leader, my question is, okay, how do I set teams up for success in doing that? Whether it's a team at EA or a team at Ubisoft or an indie team or a team that I'm running. For me, it's all about helping to connect the game to the player. And I think when you are a great business person in the industry, you see the results of that, whether it's signing a great Game Pass deal that gets your game in front of tens of millions of players that otherwise might not see it, or it's making a fantastic hire that makes your game significantly better, or finding a cool new tech solution to a problem, cloud service that allows you to scale up servers that really instantaneously if you need them. I feel like everything I have done fundamentally has been in service of bringing great games to players who want to play them.
That's really cool. It brings up two questions. I'm going to go with we'll go with both of them. But first, you talked a lot about how much you love games.
Yeah.
We know you played a lot of Pitfall. What are you playing? I won't just say what are you playing these days. I'm super curious about what your latest is, but what are the types of games you like to play?
That's a great question. So starting my career at Microprose, I was so lucky to be able to see strategy masters at work, working with Sid Meier and Brian Reynolds. And I remember being the lead tester on Civ 2. And that dev team said, look, we're going to get these games in the hands of QA as quickly as possible because they play more games than anybody else in the company. We really want to hear them. This was long before iterative development had kind of become a thing. And it was a really interesting contrast to the engineer who had had too much to drink at a holiday party and said, oh, we should just hire trained monkeys and have them do QA's job instead of playtesters. Interestingly, he's not in the industry anymore. Yeah, really. So, working with Sid and Brian and seeing how they were so inclusive of everyone in the dev team made such a huge impact on me being very early in my career. And then moving from strategy to discovering role-playing games. I am a huge, huge BioWare fangirl. I cannot wait until Veilguard is out. The only thing that might delay me for Veilguard is Metaphor ReFantasio, because I am as big a Persona fan as I am a BioWare fan, and so it's really tugging at my heart. October is going to be very much a role-playing game month for me. But, really, I love simulations, love strategy games, love RPGs. Yeah.
Not shooters.
Not shooters. Nope, not shooters. So in our talk here at DICE, I made the point that anytime I see a promotion for a shooter, it is wasted on me. Apologies to my former colleagues at Activision, but yeah, I'm not a shooter player.
Right on. Well, it's a good segue to lead into some of the remarks that you made at DICE, which I thought we could just, go into a little bit. And I thought it was really interesting that you presented at Dice basically like a some really interesting observations on the game industry, or maybe the market for games, or just the market generally, and that I hope we can just dive into a little bit. What? Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to just formulate the question the right way, but I can't, so I'll just do it the wrong way and be fine. Let's talk about it. What are some of the biggest changes that you see coming in the market that developers should be aware of today?
It's a great question. And I think it's people, it's Gen Z and Gen Alpha. So Gen Z, people who were born in the late 90s to early 2010s, Gen Alpha, early 2010s to current day. This demographic is so different from us and how we grew up and their expectations, and especially the emotional connection that they have. They feel things so deeply. They feel fandom deeply. They feel love deeply. They feel anxiety deeply. I think we are of a certain age where when we were growing up, we were worried about a nuclear bomb. Well, that was more of a theoretical worry. This generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they are worried about global warming because they can see its effects all around them. And I think it's easy to underestimate the anxiety that causes someone who's 10, 15, 20 about really what kind of planet they will have left to inhabit. So they are growing up with all of these feelings, with a connected socialization system that is unlike anything that we've seen in history. That is amazing. It's also terrifying. And so what we see with this audience is that they identify as creators. They expect connection. They hold the people or brands or products or that they are fans of, they hold them to a very high standard. And if they feel like those people or products or brands aren't acting in a way that is consistent with their values, they will change that fandom, even though it's a core part of their identity. Chris, you made this great point that people don't identify as like a punk or a goth. They identify as a Swiftie. And I think that's so insightful because it really gets to how people have turned being a fan into part of their identity.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And how does that, and it does feel like a fundamentally different thing with those two generations, Alpha and Z. How does that, for game developers, what does that mean they need to think about differently?
So many things. So first of all, how these generations discover content is very different. They use TikTok and Instagram as their search engines, not Bing and Google. And now they're starting to use ChatGPT more and more. You see these generations adopting AI at a faster pace than I think anybody would have expected. And they use ChatGPT for anything they can think of, whether it's give me a recipe for Gigi Hadid pasta or, tell me the right way to code this in Unreal. It's really astounding how AI has kind of become this always-on assistant and coach for them. How they discover content, how they play content they expect to be able to create in their content, how they adopt fandom as part of their core identity, also the devices that they play on. So about a third of Gen Z, Gen Alpha players are omni-platform. They play on mobile and PC and console and handheld. And that really changes their spending patterns. They spend about twice as much as the rest of the demographic. So while they are smaller in size, they're a significant minority. They drive the majority of spend. And interestingly, when you look at people who are not omni-platform, they tend to play really only on mobile, and their spending habits are very different. So you have this audience that sees gaming as a crucial part of their identity, as a crucial part of their entertainment. And their expectations are that they are able to play the game they want, where they want, how they want, when they want, with whoever they want. And that's so different from kind of the traditional walled gardens that you used to see in the games industry. But we've really got players setting the expectation that, look, they want to play with their friends and they don't care what device their friend has. And we as an industry had better take note of that.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting just demographic shift. How does a individual game developer have to think about things differently if they're wanting to make sure that their game appeals to Gen Z and Gen Alpha?
That is a billion-dollar question. I think first and foremost is thinking about how your players are going to find your game. I mentioned TikTok and Instagram, but there's also the value of word of mouth. And one of the things that I would tell game developers when they were considering Game Pass, but I think this is true for every game developer these days, is that you've got to be really deliberate about three things. You've got to create an amazing first hour. The first hour of your game has to be something that grabs people out of the box because there's so many choices for entertainment today. If you don't drive that amazing first hour, you're going to lose them. It used to be that somebody would spend $50, $60, $70 on a game, so they would give you a certain amount of time to really catch their attention, and that's just not the case anymore. So amazing first hour. The second is plan for viral marketing, plan for word of mouth marketing. I mentioned that people find their content on TikTok and Instagram. What are you doing in your game to make your game streamable, to really help drive those great little shorts on TikTok? There is David Gardner from London Venture Partners who said time to first laugh is a key metric that they look at. And I think that that's spot on because it's how people are streaming your game, how people are putting your game on social media, how they're talking about your game amongst their friends. That's going to be an incredibly powerful marketing force multiplier. And you've got to think about that in the game that you're creating. You know, we heard Maria, whose last name? Cornelius from Arrowhead talk about Helldivers 2 and how she said, yeah, I know people hate dying, but that's why we've got to make it hilarious. And they did such a great job. And that was something where, an event that in-game that you would normally hate, they actually made amazing. And I think that's such a powerful lesson for game developers. It's not about avoiding pain. It's about making the pain fun, making the pain Instagrammable or TikTokable or something that you want to really share and talk about with your friends. And then there's monetization. I think the traditional monetization models they're not dying, but they're changing. And so really thinking about how you can engage and monetize your player, not just with one single purchase, but on an ongoing basis is absolutely critical.
Excuse me. Is it?
Monetization? Yeah. Game developers like to get paid, Chris.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. But is ongoing monetization the only model?
It's not. Absolutely not. I think what's important is knowing what your model is going in. And if you are making a game that retails for $70 and there's no further monetization, great, awesome, good luck to you. If you are making a free-to-play game and you are relying on advertising, okay, great, awesome, good luck to you. But I think these days, more and more, you're seeing people be more creative with business models, and that can be a really good thing because we're seeing the consumer appetite for $70 games is being pretty challenging right now. And there's so much great competition in that space. And same with the free-to-play. We're seeing so much competition in that space. And so really, the fundamental question is, how are you going to stand out? How are you going to get people talking about the first hour of your game? How are you going to get people discovering your game? And how are you going to build that discovery, engagement, monetization cycle?
Sorry. Yeah, I think what's interesting, and you kind of hit on it before, is these people who are the Swiftie gamers, or gamers who in this generation, or these two generations, who do approach their fandom in a different way, and it's a much more serious part of their identity. They might not look at microtransactions. In the olden days, people were like, horse armor, like they were really opposed to it. Today, I think like if players are engaged with the content and love it, they're less afraid to just keep spending. And then that eventually becomes like sort of evidence of their love.
I think that's right. And the reality is that for people who are creating a 100-hour game experience, the large majority of your audience is not going to finish that 100 hours. So the question then becomes, who are those last 30 hours for? And does it make sense to have the same business model for everybody? Or does it make sense to take a different approach and give casual fans enough content so they feel like they got great value and great experience, but give your core fans, your core audience, a way to continue to consume content and, frankly, to pay for it? And again, I'll use myself as an example. I would so happily buy any DLC for any BioWare game or any Atlas game. You put me back in Tokyo with the Phantom Thieves, and I will write you a check. I'm super, super happy to do that. Most people don't feel that way. They should. They don't. But, to me, the question is, okay, how as game developers, how can we find a way to engage those fans, and also a way to do it that is sustainable from a business perspective? I talked about really the role of a business leader being to find a way to connect the player to the game. I think that's really important because you have to not only connect the player to the game, but do it in a way that supports game development as a career.
Yeah, and I think you hit on this a little bit earlier too. You talked about this deal you had done many years ago with Comcast and Xbox around a Halo, and what a sort of a win-win-win it was. And I think that becomes something really important, especially for this new generation of players who have a lot of emotional attachment to just how they play, how they spend. Can you talk a little bit about, I don't know the right term, but just the importance of like good faith monetization?
Oh, it's so important. And I think that's a great term, right? No player ever wants to feel like the game is unfair, whether it's the game design or the game play or the game monetization. If you feel like you are being taken advantage of, something has gone very, very wrong. And it gets back to customer obsession, player obsession. We as an industry need to treat player time, attention, and money as sacred, because it is. So many of our players, particularly in Gen Z and Gen Alpha are more likely to be unemployed. That means that anything they decide to spend is incredibly, incredibly valuable. And there's really a sacred trust there, I think. Time, attention, money, we have to deliver on that. We have to deliver in a way that makes people feel like, wow, this is the best way I can choose to invest my time, my attention, my money. I think many games do that. But as an industry, if we want to continue to survive, let alone thrive, we've really got to remind ourselves that at the end of the day, everything we do is in service to the player.
Absolutely. If you could give a current game dev or sort of maybe 3 or 4 tips on like what they should be thinking about as they're designing a game that will have the opportunity to appeal not just to the olds, but also the new generation, what would those tips be?
Oh, you're not going to like this answer because I'm going to recycle the earlier answer, which is amazing first hour, build for viral marketing, and make sure that you're thinking about monetization from the get-go. And it really is that viral marketing that I think is probably a little bit different. Like nobody sets out to make a game with a crappy first hour. But thinking about what is going to be cool and awesome, not only for your player to experience, but also for 1,000 people watching that game to experience, is a different mindset. And I think it's something that needs to be further to the top of mind than it has been in the past. I love Civ 2. Watching Civ 2 is probably very boring. If you're watching a streamer, I don't know for sure. I would 100 times rather be playing. But I think when you start to look at some of the really cool moments in games these days, the big reveal, I'll go back to one of my favorite games. Oh, I probably can't spoil Persona 5, although it's been out for a while. There's a really big reveal in Persona 5 where you're like, what just happened?
If you don't want it spoiled, turn down the volume for the next 10 seconds. And
when you find out he's really alive, and the death was totally faked, and they totally got one over on Akechi, who's known in my house as Sketchy Akechi, for good reason. When you find out that happens, it's like, whoa! And, as much as I do love my strategy games, you normally don't have quite that experience. But maybe you should. Maybe our friends at Firaxis will surprise and delight us with Civ 7. I can't wait to play.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually think the most controversial thing you said wasn't about viral marketing. It's about making sure the first hour is really fun. I agree with you. I don't think anybody sets out to make the first hour bad, but I think a lot of traditional game developers assume that if you're going to pay $70 for the game, that they've got you for several hours, and they will sometimes have the pacing be very deliberate at the beginning of the game. And what you're saying, I think, is that you don't think developers have the luxury to do deliberate pacing at the start of a game anymore.
They definitely do not. And on one hand, I empathize tremendously with the developers because there's so much you want to teach your player. You want to teach them about the critical systems. You want to teach them about the controls. You want to establish the setting and the stakes. But the reality is that all of that takes time, and it can be kind of boring. And if you have a player who has discovered the game through a subscription service, for example, there is no cost to them to go find another game. They lose nothing. And if you have a player who's economically rational and uses the sunk cost fallacy, they also will say, yeah, there's nothing I can do to get my money back. I'm just going to go find a different game because this isn't resonating with me. Or they'll ask for a refund, even worse. So the question really becomes not how do you introduce all of these things at once, but rather how do you make the first hour amazing? And how do you get the player to really want to discover all of these things? Because you don't need to introduce every system in the game in the first hour. You don't need to introduce every control in the game in the first hour. There are ways that you can set it up so that that hour is amazingly engaging initially. And then players want to keep playing and keep playing and keep playing. And I think this is where, looking at the mobile and free-to-play space, premium developers or developers who use a single purchase model can learn so much from how these games create fun instantly.
Controversial question. Do you think that teaching players how to play the game, teaching them about the different controls and things like that, is something that a typical game still needs to do? Or can they simply trust that most players know the grammar of games enough that they'll figure it out?
That's not, I think, as controversial a question as simplistic a question. Because for some games, Hades is a great example, right? Like, you can totally figure that out. And then you die and you realize you get thrown back to the start and you're like, oh, okay, I grokked this system. I get it. And that game is just so brilliant and so amazing and is such a great example of, I'm going to pick this game up and have fun right away. There are other games where the systems are just really, really complex. And whether it's a game like Fire Emblem Three Houses, which is another favorite game, or it's a role-playing game and a turn-based tactical combat, there's a lot going on there. And so trying to introduce that can be really challenging. And so they start with what is most important, tactical combat. But then they also established the backstory of Fodlan and, all of these strange green-haired people walking around. I'm not going to spoil that franchise. But there's a lot going on there. And I give those developers credit in saying, okay, we can't do all of this at once. We're going to wait and introduce some of the new systems as somebody gets further on. But even there, because of the type of game it is, because of the genre, it is more difficult to craft that I'm going to immediately pick up a controller and have a ton of fun experience.
Cool. Who's I mean, and maybe are they the ones who've done it the best in terms of introducing players to the right way to all the mechanics?
The Supergiant?
Oh no, a Fire Emblem.
Oh, no, I don't know that I would say that they are. I don't think that they're bad per se. I think because game genres are so different, trying to compare strategy game versus tactical combat versus RPG versus hack and slash versus roguelike versus deck builder, like it's really hard to point at this game did it best, particularly because of the complexities of the different genres. I do think when I think about just pick up and have fun right away, I think Hades did an amazing, amazing job of it. Right and on. Then you uncover this amazing depth that you didn't know about, in addition to these awesome characters. And it's like, wow, I am totally going to sink 100 hours into this game.
One game that I think did the first hour fun really well, it's an old one, was Cameo. And they did that trick of like, they started you with every weapon in the game. And then, 30 minutes in, it was all a dream or whatever. You end up with nothing. And then you have to really start playing the game. But it gave you that good sense of the power you have eventually.
One of the first hours that I find super memorable is Mass Effect 2. Because they kill you. A spoiler. But, certainly that is old enough that I can spoil that. I can't think of another game where you as the player character get killed right at the beginning. And it really sets up how they're going to redeem this organization that you spent the first game of the trilogy hating because they're bad guys. Like, wait a minute, they brought me back to life? Are they really bad guys? Spoiler, yes, they still are bad guys. But it was just really fascinating to me in terms of subverting narrative expectations. Like, holy, you get killed. And then you have to figure out how you're coming back to life and what this means. And wait, you're with Cerberus? What the?
That's good.
I love that game. And I think it's a really great way of introducing the basic mechanics and making it make sense that you're going to not be very good at the basic mechanics initially because you just woke up from being dead. So of course you're going to be a little bit rusty.
Yeah. OG Halo did that well too.
Yeah.
What trends right now in games? It's 2024. We're hearing a lot of bad news about games these days. There's some hopeful things too. What trends in games give you the most hope for the future? Like, what makes you happiest about not just games today, but where games are going to go in the next 3 to 5 years?
I don't know that we would have survived the pandemic as a society without games. Because when I look at how games brought us together during what was one of the most challenging experiences that many of us will ever go through, especially younger kids. I look at my kids who missed 9 months of socializing with their friends, but they were able to maintain those connections thanks to games. Or my 12-year-old who, when we moved across the country, was able to maintain her connections with her friends back in Boston thanks to games. I think there's so much power in being able to bridge geography, to bridge constraints, and to bring people together through the power of just play and the power of play together. And whether that's with a chosen community and a Minecraft private server, or with your friends in Adopt Me and Roblox, or with your college buddies when you're together playing Call of Duty, or your friends when you're playing, Final Fantasy. There's so much power in being able to connect people. And I feel like at a societal level, there's so much emphasis on disconnecting us. There's so much conflict. There's so much abhorrent behavior from so many of our leaders, really trying to increase our divisions instead of bring people together. I love being part of an industry that at its core is about bringing people together and about creating this amazing joy and emotion and fun. I think that's awesome.
That's cool. What do you want to see from games? What do you want to challenge developers and say, bring this to games in the next period?
I love that question because you're giving me the opportunity to go on a rant about my biggest pet peeve in games. And that is games that do not allow you to save at any time you want to save the damn game. Sorry, I probably couldn't say that. Anytime you, like, if I want to save the game, let me save the game. And I feel this really deeply as a parent. I would put my baby to bed and then I'd go play a game and the baby would start crying and I'd be like, I can't save. Oh no, I'm just going to get killed and go tend to the baby, right? But I think you see more and more that because we game so much more, because we expect to game where we want, how we want, when we want, we've got to be able to stop the game at any point too. Oh, I'm playing a game connected on Wi-Fi and my flight's about to take off. I need to be able to stop the game right there, right? Like, or my kid is crying, or I have to go take a meeting. Not that I'd ever play games while I was working, but anytime a player needs to step away from the games, we as an industry should accommodate that. I feel like it's a basic accessibility feature. You need to account for color blindness. You need to account for controller differences. You need to account for wanting to save your game. Rant over.
I think it's a good rant. You've had an awesome career so far in games. We're not going to talk about what you're doing next because you already said you didn't want to talk about it. How do you... I asked you how the 7-year-old you looking forward would feel about your career. How does the more than 7-year-old, modern you feel looking back on your career? And I'm really fascinated by the time that you took time away from games and went into healthcare, which is, very easy to say like that. That's like the greatest benefit for humanity, right? Keeping people alive, keeping people healthy. What made you come back to games? And how does, as somebody who's worked, I've never worked outside of games. So as somebody who's actually been on the outside with the regular people, how did it make you feel differently about working in games, getting that non-game experience?
That's a great question. And in both of my times outside of games, I was supporting people who had so much higher stakes than we do. If we have a bad day, nobody dies. If we have a bad day, we go home in a grumpy mood, but we can bounce back. And when I was running client relations at Edisist, one of our largest clients was a hospital group because they supported registered nurses going back to get their bachelor's degree or master's degree in nursing. And I look at the amount of care and sacrifice people in those careers do in healthcare and in so many other careers that are, frankly, so undervalued by society. And that really makes me think, first of all, how lucky am I? How lucky am I that I can help people make fun? But also, what can I do that helps impact the world in a positive way? I'm not a nurse. I'm not going to be able to take care of somebody in terms of supporting their health beyond, the normal caretaker responsibilities we all have. But it really got me thinking and doing a lot of soul searching around how I want to spend the rest of my time on the planet. And I got great advice from a friend of mine, a friend and mentor, Ron Boyer, who said, look, do you want to write a line on a resume or do you want to write a line in a eulogy? Do you want to do something that makes you easier to hire? Or do you want to do something that really makes a difference in someone's life, that has an impact on them? Whether it's being a great leader or manager or supporting somebody as they try something new in their career or helping a developer make a better game and really build their personal and studio success and financial sustainability. that becomes really kind of my guiding principle. Like, is this something that I am doing because I have to? Or is it something that I am doing that is really going to make a meaningful difference to somebody? Whether that somebody is a nurse playing Candy Crush, or a release manager who is looking for their next promotion and wants career coaching, or a developer who is almost but not quite there with their game. At the end of the day, I want to spend my time making a positive impact. I'm able to do that through supporting people building fun, which is awesome. But I think that there's so much more to do as well. And that is what I really try to hold myself accountable to personally.
Right on. I'm just going to ask, I don't know what your answer is going to be. That's why I'm asking the question. But do you see games as a great way or as a way to actually make a positive impact on the planet?
Oh, yes, absolutely. No question. I talked earlier about games being able to bring people together, but so we're doing this thing with my family right now. I got back into Stardew Valley, which meant my 12-year-old got back into Stardew Valley and my 7-year-old got back into Stardew Valley. And with my 7-year-old, he really wants to play with mom. And so we now have this nightly tradition where before bed, we'll do Stardew Snuggles for 30 minutes and we'll kind of get together and we'll play on our farm. And the connection that we have, because we're able to talk about, oh, okay, don't forget, you don't want to plant this crop because the season's about to end, and let's make sure we do that, and who took care of the animals. Watching my two daughters fight about who they want to marry. Apparently, Sam is in hot demand for some reason. It's such a great way for people to connect, for parents to connect with kids, for friends to connect. I think that's amazing. And being part of an industry that builds that emotional connection and that makes the world a happier place, a more interesting place, a more exciting place, that's fantastic. We're so lucky.
That's awesome. It's cool that even having worked in healthcare, you still think
games is it is maybe we're not going to save someone's life, but it is really special and a great way to connect millions of people.
Yeah, I think we save people's lives every day. Honestly, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like maybe not. Yeah. Like we might not make their heart rate change. You know what?
Oh, we do.
Well, yeah, I guess we do. Yeah, but I think that the psychological benefit of games and its ability to bring people together and just give people social currency to spend on the play yard or at work or something, I think is yeah.
Yeah. And when I look at people who have said, I pick up my teenager from high school and they give me one-word answers, but then we go and we play Fortnite together, we play Valorant together, or we do whatever together. Like it's such a great way to bridge those experiences and to build those connections and to build that social currency. What advice do you have for me, Chris? We've known each other forever and we've worked together over the last 3 years. What advice do you have for me as I think about what's next?
That's a good question. I'm going to have to answer this question carefully because I sort of know what you're doing next, but we're not telling everybody else. I don't think you need much advice. Like, honestly, like I think you have a very good idea of what you want to do next and a good idea of how to implement it. And you're kind of doing it. So like, I think the only advice I have for you is we need to get more friends to join the Elks Club.
Chris and I belong to the Ballard Elks Lodge, which is this, if anyone is in Seattle, you should look us up because it is this amazing social club that is on the water that is just full of awesome people. And we do have the secret plot to bring more people into the Elks.
you've had this awesome career. You've been in games for quite a long time. When there's a lot more women in games today than there used to be, when you joined the industry, it was a lot more rare. And you've also done something that a lot of women haven't, which is you've stayed in the industry the whole time. You left for a little while, you came back. Can you talk a little bit about that experience and maybe how it's changed? And yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I remember when I started in the industry, I was the only woman in playtest. There were times when I was the only woman in all of development at Microprose. And Bill Staley, who is the owner of the company at the time, was taking this tour group of Japanese businessmen around. We were working on F-15-3, and he stops right behind my chair in the test pit. It really was a pit. It was a converted hallway with just tables pushed up against the walls, and said, "And look, our game has an easy mode, so even girls can play it." That was my introduction to being a woman in the games industry. And, there were a lot of really difficult experiences. I remember the strip club that Gathering and Developers set up in the parking lot outside of E3 one year. Thank goodness that has changed. Now I've had the experience of working for amazing women, of seeing women in leadership positions. Sarah Bond is the president of Xbox. And I think if even 5 years ago you said there's going to be a Black woman who is the president of a major console, I don't know that anyone would have believed it. For me, the chance to work with amazing women, not just Sarah and Lori Wright, but also people like Brenda Romero, Shannon Loftus, Kiki Wolfkill, they've really been tremendous examples to me, and examples of how you can take the challenges that you experience and turn them into a drive to make things better so that the people who come after you have an easier path. And I've volunteered in the games industry really for as long as I've been part of it. And a lot of that is because I feel a responsibility to people who come after me, no matter what their gender is, no matter what their age is, no matter what their ethnicity or orientation is, to make it easier for people who want to make games to make great games. And to never feel like, gosh, I'm the only in the room, I'm the only woman, or I'm the only Black person, or I'm the only person who is obviously different from anyone else. So is what I say important? Will I be listened to? Will I be heard? If I am able to have changed that in even a small way, then I'm both proud and grateful for the opportunity I've had to do it. Because frankly, I've gone through some stuff I don't ever want anybody else to go through. It's something that I really feel we as an industry are not kind to our talent. We can be a lot better. And part of that is thinking about how we not only bring people into the industry, but how we retain them. And that's particularly challenging if you are a member of an underrepresented community. You're significantly more likely to turn out of the games industry. Every time that happens, we lose a really valuable perspective. We lose a really valuable story. I maintain, going back to my rant about making sure you can save a game at any point, like once you've had kids, that will never, ever be a question because you know what it's like to have to drop everything and tend to a baby who is crying. And so I think the more that we build a community that is welcoming of different experiences, different perspectives, different goals, different approaches, the better our games will be and the better we'll be at connecting games with players.
Awesome.
Cool.
Okay, now I'm going to ask the wrap-up question.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Before I ask the wrap-up question, how did it feel to be a role model in games? Like you talked earlier about your, being a woman in games and some of the responsibilities you felt to try and make things easier for other people who were coming up who felt underrepresented. You talked about some great role models you've had. You didn't mention, but you should have, or I'll just mention it, that you were also like a fantastic role model in games for, being a straight up person, for advocating for others, for advocating for yourself, for advocating for the right thing to do. How do you how does that make you feel to know that there's lots of people, whether they're at Microsoft or elsewhere, who really do look up to you as a role model, and how does that affect how you behave on a go forward basis?
I should ask you the same question. For me, it's really thinking about the responsibility I have as a leader, as someone who has some influence in the industry, and as somebody who cares very deeply about people, about our players, about our developers, about the people who aren't players or developers yet, but will be or could be. And I think when I go back to are you writing a line in a resume or are you writing a line in a eulogy? It's a great way, a morose way, but a great way to sum up how every day we have a chance to make an impact. We have a chance to make something better. Even on our worst days, even on our most challenging days, little gestures, little acts of kindness, little, hey, you did a really great job on that, can have this huge impact. And I think sometimes it's easy to take for granted how even those small things, those little bits of recognition, those little times where you say, oh, wait a minute, that was actually so-and-so's idea, or, hey, you cut this person off. Let's go back and hear what they have to say. Acting as an ally is a chance to make a meaningful impact with almost no investment from you. And so I feel a real responsibility to do that. And I feel a responsibility, again, to our players, to developers, to help them succeed as much as possible. Because I talked about the deal that we did with Comcast and Xbox and how it was a win-win-win. To me, that's how life should be. Life is not a zero-sum game. And so when one game does really well, that doesn't mean that it hurts other game developers. It hopefully makes them a lot better, right? They get to learn from it, they get joy, they get to play it. So if we can, in each day, do something that whether either makes the path easier for those who come behind, or that helps someone else succeed, or that even just recognizes for somebody else, like, hey, I saw you do this thing, and you did great. Wow, that's the kind of impact that people are going to remember long after I leave a job.
Right on. That is an awesome answer, and I think we will end it on that note because that's fantastic. Thanks so much for participating in the podcast, and super excited for you to reveal publicly what you're doing next.
Thank you so much, Chris.